scheduled cuts that will take place unless Congress and the White House act would mean 8.2% cut in most Department of Education programs. What would it do?
Funding is used to provide students with the resources they need to succeed, such as textbooks.
In California, the school districts are funded by primarily the state, and secondarily, many of our districts, including our Garden Grove Unified School District, is funded by the federal government.
It used to come out of the local tax base, property tax base, and we started to use the state tax base instead of the local property tax base to keep things more even. Federal government at about the same time started helping schools too, thinking, you know, poor areas need some federal money. So now you had a little bit of local tax money, you had state money, and you had federal money. The state started to say, well, you know what, if the federal government's kicking in money, we don't have to kick in as much anymore. And I think that what's happened over time is that schools are funded less.
Of course, it's all dependent upon the national and state economy, which, as everyone knows, has not been doing very well recently. So in turn, our funding has decreased significantly.
So the budget cuts for funding really began in late 2007, after the deepest recession we've had in 70 years. And in response to this recession, states relied heavily on spending cuts. So instead of creating a balanced mix of spending cuts and revenue increases, funding for schools fell sharply.
Well, over the course of the last few years with the really severe budget cuts, a lot of our expenses are in salaries. So we've eliminated positions.
Okay, the worst year of the recession was last year, 2012, because most of the emergency financial aid we received had expired. So we received nearly $1 billion in new state budget cuts. $330 million of that was taken from funding for schools, and $248 million of that $330 was taken from funding for school buses. At Garden Grove High School itself, sports programs such as golf and badminton have been cut, and the school library is only open 3 out of the 5 days of the week, only up till 3 p.m., so that means that when the students get out after 6th period, the library is only open for 16 minutes.
The other is that we've lost some other positions, instructional aides we've lost some clerical positions, we've lost some library support positions and attendance office positions, and we lost a nurse's aide.
$3.54 billion in education cuts would go into effect, $1.1 billion to Title I, nearly $900 million to the IDEA program, nearly $600 million in cuts to Head Start, and a loss of more than 70,000 jobs.
What this cut would do was cut 100,000 slots of Head Start, which means 100,000 fewer kids would have pre-K programs. We know that health programs for kids are so important. And what this would do would cut 100,000 health care slots in terms of community medical centers across the country. There are thousands of cuts slated for kids who are in schools that focus on disadvantaged kids. So that would mean cuts to music, more cuts to art, more cuts to reading programs that kids need to get ready.
Because school budget has been decreased, more teachers have been laid off, making classroom sizes bigger. When class sizes grow, there is less attention given to each student.
Student to teacher ratio has gone from about 29:1 to about 33:1. So our classes are bigger. As you guys know, there's more kids in every class. And that's been one of the biggest, most negative effects, and you've all seen that. If you're in a classroom that has more kids, it's going to be a little harder for the teacher to really meet the needs of every single kid, every single student in a very crowded classroom.
There's 300,000 fewer teachers today than there were at the start of the recession. That's about a 10% decrease. What that has meant is that kids have less art, they have less music, they have less extracurricular activities, they have less AP courses. So we actually have to reverse that if we really believe that kids should have a decent shot at success.
Well, I think No Child Left Behind, as we called it in the last authorization, I think there's a consensus that it's broken. And so the reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act needs to have a major overhaul. As we've looked at the proposals that have come forward, there are some good things. Number one, they've maintained the emphasis on the disaggregation of data. We need to know which students in subgroups are not performing well so that we can change what's going on and make sure those students are not cheated out of their opportunity for a real education.
Schools are pushing students towards higher standards and test scores because of the competition with other schools for funding. Although standards are being raised, the lack of resources, programs, and teachers are making it harder to reach.
Poor funding in schools have led to budget cut days. Budget cut days are days that are meant to save money for schools but have also affected the student's education. It cuts school days that can be used for teaching and learning, so there is less time to learn and more things to cram.
In our district, we refer to those days as furlough days because, yes, it is to save money. How it's affected our schools, it's put a bigger burden on our teachers and our students to do the same amount of instruction and learning in less time.
And we use some of our money too for after-school programs, and those are really important, where we can identify some additional help that kids need, give them the help they need after school in math, science, history, and English, and their test scores will go up. If we don't have the funds to help the kids during class, or to help them with instructional aids, or to give them the help with tutoring and things like that after school, I think it is going to be harder on the test scores.
My view on Prop 30 is very positive. The district is very happy that Prop 30 was passed by the voters in the last election. It has allowed us to avoid further cuts, major cuts within our district, and obviously to save programs and staffing. It was about $20 million, round numbers, to our district that we would have had to cut even further if it would have failed. So you can imagine that's a lot of money. That's since most of our money's in salaries and benefits, it probably would have required some concessions in those areas. So yes, it's allowed us to continue on with our programs and to offer some other improvements in the learning environment.
So what I'm saying is, you look at 8.2%, it's a number, but when you think about what it's about the investment that kids really need to be ready in schools. And at the very same time, as we're saying to teachers, we need to help kids think, apply knowledge. We need to raise standards. We can't be about actually cutting the things that really helps kids.